Hello YouTube and welcome to the first devlog for our upcoming dungeon game. We spent the last 2 months designing the core gameplay loop and building the foundational systems that will drive the rest of the development. The game doesn't have a name yet, but if I had to describe it in 3 words, it would be roguelike, dungeon crawler, Deckbuilder. In this video, we will introduce the game and show the progress we made so far. Like many other roguelike deck builders, our game draws inspiration from the genre-defining deck building game Slay the Spire, though we hope to bring our own spin to the genre by implementing RPG elements, exploration, and random card generation. In our game, the player explores an increasingly difficult dungeon while building up the deck, leveling up the attributes, and finding powerful equipment. At first, we had somewhat of an idea what we wanted to make, but many core questions about the gameplay were still unanswered. Our first goal was to create a simple scene where the player could fight an enemy. This included implementing some simple enemy logic where it can take damage and deal damage, the player having a handful of cards and being able to play them. At the time, we thought it could be a fun mechanic if the player could play multiple cards at the same time, kind of like you play hands in Balatro. We did go away from this idea later, sticking to a more traditional mechanic where you play 1 card at a time. We also didn't know how the cards would work. At this time, the cards only had 1 effect. This was also the next thing we expanded on as we introduced a core mechanic of our game, which is randomly generated cards. A card is essentially an empty shell with 3 rune slots. The actual effects of a card come from the runes placed into these slots. And when a card then is played, it is the runes that determine what actually happens. Cards acquired through exploration, combat, or random events will come with a random number of runes, typically between 1 or 3. However, more runes doesn't always mean a stronger card. Since runes are assigned randomly, it is essential to prioritize runes that synergize well. When a card is played, its runes activate one after another in sequence. This allows runes to interact and build on each other. For example, one rune might apply a status effect, while the next one takes advantage of it. Players can also acquire runes separately and socket them into cards to create or refine synergies. This gives you control over your deck's playstyle and enables strategic customization as you progress through the game. I created a dungeon generator that builds levels in 2 main steps. First, it creates a critical path. It does this by placing a starting module, choosing a random direction, adding another module, and repeating this process until the path reaches the desired length. The final module placed becomes the boss room, ensuring there's always a guaranteed route from the start to the boss. Next, the generator adds branching paths. It randomly selects modules along the critical path and creates new paths that either loop back or terminate in dead ends, making the layout interesting and varied. Once the dungeon is generated, it goes through a validation process to ensure the quality of the dungeon is correct. It asks, is there a valid path connecting the start and boss module? Does the dungeon contain the correct number of modules? Is the number of dead-end rooms within an acceptable range? Are there any excessively long paths without branching? Only if these questions pass, the dungeon is accepted. Often hundreds of dungeon candidates get generated before one qualifies. And when the dungeon is accepted, each module is replaced by a 3D model based on its connection. And now we have an interesting dungeon generator. We then worked on combining our 2D environment with the new 3D dungeon generator. We also created a new movement script such that the player can move freely around the dungeon. We also worked on assigning room types such that each room can either have a random event, fight, mini-boss, etc. For future implementation. We've also been working on integrating enemies into the new 3D environment, allowing them to spawn randomly across dungeon rooms. Thanks to Unity's prefab system, adding new enemies is quick and efficient. Each enemy is a variant of a base enemy prefab that includes all necessary UI elements and scripts. Enemy data is defined using scriptable objects, which store properties like the enemy's name, sprite, health, and behavior pattern. Behavior is driven by an action pattern, a class containing a list of turns where each turn holds one or more action that the enemy can perform. The enemy progresses through these actions turn by turn and loops back once the pattern is complete. Right now we implemented basic actions like action and shield, but we plan to expand this system with many more actions in the future. My friend and co-developer is currently deep into designing the enemy sprites and animations. He's using Sprite for the pixel art and Smack Studio to rig and animate them, which really speeds up the process. It's been cool seeing the characters come to life from rough sketches to fully animated enemies. The last couple of things I did before making this video was adding textures and normal map to the modules, adding some dust particle effects and tweaking the light source for some better visuals. I also did an overhaul on the card hand system, fixing some bugs and adding animation on hovering. At last I added info boxes besides the cards, explaining each of its runes. We are excited to keep building this game. There are plenty of unique features and gameplay ideas we already planned, and we can't wait to share them with you. If the project looks interesting and you'd like to follow our journey, consider subscribing for future updates.